Thanks. And I would like to say welcome to all of you, and a particular welcome of course, to you, Sizwe. These webinars are something that the University of Southern Denmark does together with NAFA, Naturfagsakademiet, the Science Academy of Denmark. And they are webinars that focus on science education and how to work with the development of science education at a teacher level. And the webinars have various kinds of presentations of work in progress and also of finished work. And my name is Connie Swabo. Most of you know me, but there's at least one person who doesn't. So I'm just going to say that my role here is to chair this series. I'm a professor at the University of Southern Denmark, and I chair the series together with Martin Silersen, who is the head of NAFA's research part. And we have here with us Sizwe Nxasana. Is that the correct way of pronouncing it, Sizwe?
It's close enough. It's Nzasana. There's a click.
Nzasana.
That's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here, Sizwe. And what you're going to be sharing with us is something that I put under the title, or I think we put under the title, What Can Denmark Learn from Project-Based Learning in South Africa? And the background for this, at least for me, is that you defended your PhD at the end of May at Aalborg University, at the Center for Problem-Based Learning in Aalborg University. And you had done a PhD which focuses on how to navigate teacher learning in the context of project-based learning in South African K-12 education. And I had the pleasure of being on the committee that assessed your work. And I found it very interesting, the work, and I also found your profile and your background really interesting. So I'm hoping that you will tell a little bit about also how you came to actually do this doctoral thesis on problem-based learning in a South African context. Both because it's inspiring to hear about people that have a background in one context or domain and then shift into another domain. I think that's your story is a story for me of that kind of inspiration. And then, of course, also hoping that you will share the actual work of the thesis. That's what we have spoken about. So welcome, Sizwe. We look forward to hearing about your work. And I would like to mention that I've scheduled this to last until 4:30. We'll probably complete it earlier. We will take the time that we find it, that there's energy. So welcome, Sizwe.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Connie. And it's also good to see Camilla in the session here, one of my, former colleagues at Aalborg University. So I'm going to share my slides. Hopefully you can hear me clearly. Just let me know if you can't hear me.
It's perfect.
Good. So, I'm going to do the presentation just, covering the topics as you can see on the screen here. But I think it's important just by way of background and to the point that, Prof. Connie was making, to give you a little bit of background of South Africa and why I got involved in education and why I decided to do a PhD. And I was just saying earlier that, from today, we have a whole delegation from Aalborg Commune representing the schools and the officials because we are hosting an international conference on PBL on Monday, which is quite a big honor for us. So we have more than 200 delegates that are descending on our schools, and they'll be spending time with us we'll learn from them. So delegates from India, China, Malaysia, the US, Denmark, the big delegation from Denmark. And maybe just to give you a little bit of background, I was a corporate executive for many years. So I started off being a chartered accountant in South Africa. I started a firm which is now the 5th largest firm in South Africa after the big firms like Deloitte and KPMG and EY and PwC. After that, I then went to telecoms. I was a CEO of a national telecoms company for 10 years. After telecoms, I then went into banking. I was the CEO of the largest bank in Africa for another 10 years. And when I retired, I decided that I was going to get involved in education. So I founded a number of entities in education that are public benefit organizations. So the National Education Collaboration Trust is a trust or a foundation that brings together teacher unions that are very strong in South Africa. We have about 450,000 teachers in South Africa, 13 million children that are in K-12, and 5 very strong teacher unions. And it's important, they're very, very important stakeholder in our country. And secondly, organized business, because issues in education in South Africa are very complex. You know, the quality of our education system is still not where it should be. So just about 2 hours ago, in preparation for the conference on Monday, I was speaking to the Minister of Education, the National Minister of Education, who's going to be delivering a keynote address. So the whole idea for what I do, and even starting the schools in 2017, is to sort of act as a laboratory for innovation in education, for how we can integrate technology, how we can train teachers and prepare teachers for this fast-changing world. At the end of the day, how do we, you know, make it better for young children or for young people, you know, to enter the world of work with skills and competencies that improve their lives and their communities and so on. So that's always been the case. So even though my schools are independent schools, the idea was always to work with a big public system. And then last year, I started a teacher college. So I now have a teacher college to train teachers in service, as well as we're going through a process of accreditation for pre-service, in other words, for initial teacher education. I also started an education technology company because technology is quite important, especially not just as a tool for learning and teaching, but also, you know, to teach young people technological skills and therefore impart those skills of integrating technology in the classroom to the teachers and the whole ecosystem. So yeah, so that's really, if you like, the key, you know, objective and aim that when I started the school, I always had them in mind, a systemic approach to how our schools and our teacher college would impact the public system, which, as I indicated earlier, is quite a large and very complex system. And I must be honest, I mean, even though our schools are now in their 9th year and our teacher college is fairly new, the education technology company has been going for the last, you know, 4 years almost. We're making really good strides in influencing how the public system works, from a policy standpoint to teacher preparation, to initial teacher education and continued professional development, to curriculum, to assessments, especially in the face of AI and technology and all of this. So, you know, we now operating across the whole ecosystem in South Africa, and we're starting to really gain traction and scale a lot of the initiatives that we do. So when I started this, then the question was, how do we know that what we're doing works? And for me, that was a curiosity that then led me to do a PhD, to really ground my own thinking personally. There's a personal journey as part of this, so that I had a much deeper understanding, because I came from corporate and I was not an educationist before. You know, so, and often when you come from corporate, you have certain notions and ideas of what should happen. But for me, I wanted to ground whatever I do on academic rigor, which is quite important. And in fact, not just me, we now, having started the teacher college, obviously it's important to bring on board people that have an academic outlook to what we do, not just sort of being practitioners. Of course, the advantage here is that even doing the PhD, doing a PhD, I'm a practitioner on the one hand. So I'm doing things on the ground. I'm starting businesses and growing businesses. And I'm obviously pursuing an academic project on the other side. So, which I really found really interesting. And it allowed me to reflect quite a lot about what I do, what we do at our schools, and how we do things, and all of that. So, and in working on the research, so my supervisor is Professor Chiang Du, associate with the co-supervisor, Associate Professor Lege Boka. So we spent some time just looking at how I was going to approach my research, and the key issue and subject of research was around teachers and how teachers navigate their learning. Because if, as in South Africa, teachers still follow a very traditional approach to learning and teaching, the key issue is how do they become PBL teachers? That was a key question. When I hired the teachers, the first batch of teachers, I took about 20 teachers to the US, to a chain of schools. There are charter schools in San Diego that have been following a program of project-based learning for a number of years, and they spent some time getting training there. They came back, and obviously the context is really important here. When they came back, we had to then find ways of how to implement PBL in the South African context, because we have a national curriculum. In the US, they don't, and there are a lot of local dynamics, that we needed to address. And we structured a program where on a weekly basis, our teachers go through professional development on various topics. But I wasn't sure whether what we're doing is actually working. So I had to then structure the research, to look at how teachers learn, starting off by looking at their beliefs, their pedagogical beliefs particularly, and secondly, whether their pedagogical beliefs are aligned to their actual practicum or teaching practice. And then thirdly, what really contributes to their learning, because initially when we started, we just followed a very linear input-output approach, one size fits all in terms of how we're training teachers. And that was working somewhat, but it wasn't really that effective. And then, my whole research was grounded on, the constructivist learning theory, obviously looking at project or problem-based learning, teacher pedagogical beliefs and the practices, and just understanding the ecosystem, the system thinking approach within the context of the complexity theory. And I won't really lecture you about constructivism, but it's something that we had started practicing using by implementing project-based learning in our schools in South Africa. And that really requires a lot of student-centeredness in the approach that the teachers adopt in terms of how they're planning, how they teach. We have interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary teaching, for instance, that we've been doing for the last 9 years. We have constructive alignment in terms of teaching, and as well as assessments and what happens in the classroom. But it was important now ground what we do in our schools on very sound, theories and practice. That was quite important. And just in terms of PBL itself, I mean, PBL is very aligned to constructivism. Because it does really put the student or the learners at the center, and it encourages a lot of collaboration, problem solving, and critical thinking. And we've been doing all of that since we started. But again, without necessarily any formal sort of academic grounding in terms of how we were doing it. But, you know, nevertheless, we've been sort of doing it. And then as far as the beliefs are concerned, you know, it's something that I'd never thought about before I started this research, that, you know, you've got to start by looking at what do people believe before you start with any intervention. And it was quite interesting because obviously I learned that, you know, the pedagogical beliefs are multidimensional, they're very contextual. There are a lot of people come into the environment of our schools with a lot of baggage and barriers. You know, but yet those beliefs shape what they do in the classroom. So if they're the whole traditional beliefs, as an example, you can train them, but they still continue to do what they believe. So that was quite an important aspect. The issue of complexity has really been quite an important one. You know, as I mentioned earlier, I've been a corporate executive for many years. This is, you know, since I started in education in 2017, this is the most complex thing I've ever done by a long shot. You know, running in big companies and all of this, normally, you know, you have inputs and outputs. But, you know, how people learn is quite a complex, you know, thing. And therefore, you know, it's just understanding, you know, complexity and learning in a complex dynamic system has been quite a revelation for me, because I never quite thought of it that way until I started the PhD. And obviously, you know, complexity is very broad and very wide, but in my research, I had to narrow it down to 3 domains. One, the teacher, you know, teachers are a complex system themselves, the individuals, and then the school, our school. So the research was done at our schools. But, you know, the school obviously is a system in itself, which is also quite complex. And then the learning activity systems within our schools, you know, so, you know, and that's quite important. So this was inspired by, you know, of PEDA in terms of, you know, the design of the research itself. And maybe just to give you a bit of context, we do PBL from preschool, in other words, from the little ones at our schools. We admit children from when they are 1 year old, and already at that level, they are solving problems, they are playing. We have a PBL and learn through play model for our preschoolers, so that we don't use technology. They're outside and playing, but it's very, in certain cases, structured as well as unstructured play, which encourages learning. And it's quite important. And in fact, we now, starting to roll this out in public, preschools, or preschools that are funded by the government. They learn through play and PBL integrated in the in early or foundational learning. And then we do it all the way, to the senior school. And kids do a number of projects. I mean, like today with the Danish delegation that's visiting our schools, all the grades were showcasing a lot of the projects. So some of the projects are mini projects that they do on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a term basis, on a yearly basis, and so on. And as they go to the senior phases, maybe just to give you a bit of context, our schools start from K all the way up to 12th grade. So, at the senior grades, there would be 16, 17-year-old. So they're only now in our schooling system. As they go to the senior grades, they start to do a lot more complex, projects, which integrate a lot of subjects. As they get into what we call further education and training phases, which is grade 10 and 11, we give them individual projects of their choice. So the student must go and find something that's of interest to them, and they do a yearly project. So they start from the beginning of the year, and we assess those projects towards the end of the year. So it's quite a rigorous process, and they have to do what, for instance, university students would do. They have to have their posters, They have to have their exhibitions. We invite, outside people, including parents and other stakeholders, where our students present, almost similar to what you'd see, in a university research, sort of presentation. One of the things that we do very rigorously, at least 3 times a year, is all our teachers come together from preschool all the way up to the 12th grade, and we do what we call curriculum mapping. So curriculum mapping is all about finding connecting points in each and every subject, and to enable and allow for interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary teaching. So curriculum mapping, for instance, we're going to do it in about 3 weeks' time as part of planning for 2026. So all the teachers will come together, and then they break into groups. There's quite a lot of negotiation that goes on because it is about finding, common themes, common topics, eliminate duplications across subjects. As an example, I'm a teacher, I'm a qualified teacher who teaches accounting, as an example. So for me to teach certain concepts in accounting, it's important, for instance, for a mathematics teacher to have covered, for instance, certain elements of algebra. It's important, for instance, for maybe the language teachers to have taught certain things so that when students engage with accounting concepts, they understand the importance of communication and language and writing reports and interpreting reports and all of this. So, and often when I'm teaching accounting, as an example, I may have a mathematics teacher, a geography teacher, a language teacher in my class, in the same class. So our classes are built in a way that allows for flexibility. Some of them you can make into small groups. Some of them I can break the classroom into a much bigger, classroom with like 60 students in a class, and they're doing activities in that class that integrate the kind of knowledge or content that they're engaging with. So curriculum mapping is something that is really important because what it does, initially when we started, our teachers thought PBL will create more work. But actually what it's done now, teachers have a lot more time for reflection, for supervising and guiding students. And students do most of the work, and teachers are there to provide the guidance. And it's really worked, amazingly, way beyond our expectation. And now when it comes to, the PhD itself, I've already, spoken about the fact that I looked at the complexity theory, and therefore the complex dynamic system for like a system thinking approach. The whole research itself was inspired by DBR, design-based research, because it provided an opportunity for an iteration and for engagement with the teachers, because the whole aim was to improve our continuing professional development for teachers. So, and therefore their inputs and their knowledge and their reflection was really important, so that we could design a new approach of professional, development. And just following a DBR process, and it absolutely helped to bring teachers on board and to get them to buy in to what we're trying to do, but also for them to understand that this, whatever we're doing, was in their interest. And because, obviously I'm an owner of the schools, from an ethical standpoint, it was also important for me to maintain a certain level of distance. And therefore, I was using the school management quite a lot in terms of, DBR process and even collecting data and so on. And just looking at the process itself, we started, initially, we had annual professional development plans, but they were all over the place. They, as I said earlier, they followed a one-size-fits-all approach. In the main, we're doing mainly workshops and lectures. And we started now, as we're engaging with the DBR process, revising how we're doing PD, having clear objectives and clear outcomes for each of the activities of professional development that we were doing. And we started, implementing that as I was continuing to do the research. And the research itself, exploring teacher pedagogical beliefs, I sort of used multiple data, methods for that. And then for exploring how the teachers enact their teaching practice, I use Q methodology. And I also use Q methodology for investigating what contributes to their learning, to the teacher learning. And that process in itself, especially the Q methodology, allows for all views, including minority views or views that often may be ignored, to come to the fore, which was quite a useful methodology to use in the context of the number of teachers that we have. Maybe just to give an example, we have about 120 teachers at our school. So, getting all the different views of the teachers, obviously with a sample selection, was quite important. I did mention the ethical issues that I had to face, obviously, as an owner of the school, and making sure that I could maintain a level of, distance in terms of the views that were expressed by the teachers. So that's why using, Q methodology and even the first multiple data collection was anonymized and all of that, so that we couldn't really, attribute any of the comments to particular individuals. And when it comes to the exploring of the pedagogical beliefs, I used the methodology, which is, tested the teacher belief survey as a tool that explored teacher traditional classroom management, traditional teaching approaches, constructivist teaching, and constructivist parents, because parents play quite an important role. And also to explore further how teachers thought. There were open-ended questions where we used metaphors and so on to identify what teachers believed, and that involved 83 teachers who had been with our school, from anything between newly joined teachers to those that had been with us for 5 years or more. So obviously we have a whole sort of different demographic in terms of the kind of teachers that we have. The results just indicated that, those teachers who had been with us for more than 12 months practice more constructivist approaches to learning and teaching. Whereas those teachers who had newly joined, who typically come from a traditional learning and teaching environment, still held traditional beliefs, and they also practice more traditional beliefs in their classroom. But even those teachers that had been with us for longer, they all struggled, in navigating between constructivist beliefs and traditional beliefs, because, the environment is just such, is quite complex. And in the second phase, where we explored what teachers actually enacted in the classroom in terms of their teaching practice, as I indicated, I use a Q methodology for that process. And it was really a very, very important process because, as I indicated earlier, it does reveal patterns, but it also takes on board the views of the minority, which is often very, very important. And we looked at what teachers do in practice. Obviously, their self-reported beliefs using the Q methodology, and for that phase, we had 40 teachers that participated. That was a subsample of the 83 that had originally started in phase one, and we ended up with 3 themes that came out, and they were all very aligned constructivist approaches. Factor one, those teachers who were looking much more at real life issues that students bring into the classroom, and how they develop their learning and teaching support material. And factor 2 were teachers who prioritize student characteristics, particularly their prior knowledge, their interest, and so on, which is quite important in a PBL environment. And thirdly, those teachers who, especially those that teach in lower grades and in primary school, the relationship with parents was particularly important. And when it comes to those factors that contribute to teacher learning, in the system thinking PD professional development program, just looking at how we previously did PD, yes, we had mentors, yes, we had, regular PDs every week, but the fact of the matter is, there was lack of coherence in terms of our PDs. There were sort of standalone PDs that happened every week, and sometimes the topics were determined by the principals or the heads of the schools, as opposed to what teachers really needed. So it was a top-down process, a very linear process of PD. It did, show some positive results, but we needed to improve how that process worked. And when you look at, just the key, sort of principles that we looked at here, was, to look at, teacher learning in a complex dynamic system where, in that system, we understand that we can't just adopt a one-size-fits-all in terms of how we train teachers. And that's still a work in progress, but the way the newly structured PD is now structured, which we still do on a weekly basis. Our teachers do at least 160 hours per year professional development on various topics, but it's now structured around interconnected activities. And it's a lot more dynamic, it's a lot more diverse, and teachers, follow different pathways depending on what they think they need, as opposed to a top-down approach to how we do PD. That diversity in terms of the system thinking approach to PD, and now has a variety of approaches to PD. It's not just workshops and mentorships. We've had mentorships and workshops from the beginning, as well as lectures, but we now have, classroom or communities of practice. We have classroom practice and observations and so on, which happen on a regular basis. Some of them are structured, some of them are unstructured, and teachers do those themselves. But what we found is that there's a lot more engagement now amongst teachers with how they learn and what they may be interested, to pursue. Including, for instance, we pay for our teachers to get, additional education outside if they want to enroll for certain programs at universities or other institutions. We encourage that because that may be a lot more useful to them. But it also, what it does, it increases the level of engagement and the level of, just the level of satisfaction, that our teachers have at this moment. And in that process, we ended up using the Q methodology, came up with, 6 factors in total. Some of them were opposite sides of the same factor. So that's why we had to break them. I had to break them down into 2. That's factor 2A and 2B. So I won't really bore you and go into detail, other than to say that the results that came out of it, indicated that how teachers learn in a much more, useful way. And the complexity of teacher learning allowed us to then follow a non-linear process, a more dynamic process of how we train teachers at our schools. So when you look at the 3 phases, teacher beliefs were really important, but what emerged was that even those teachers that adopt constructivist beliefs still grapple and struggle with traditional beliefs and balancing between those and constructivist beliefs. And the same applies to the second phase, of what teachers actually enact in the classroom. it's a complex environment. Beliefs are important. They shape what teachers do. Those beliefs do change over time, but it takes time to change those beliefs. Essentially, there definitely has been a much more marked and material change in terms of, teachers enacting more constructivist approaches in the classroom. And as I said, the teacher PD is still work in progress. Yes, it's a lot more dynamic. It's a lot more centered around the needs of the teachers, but it is a complex environment itself. And just obviously using the different theoretical methodologies that are used, they themselves are not completely perfect. So so I think one is to recognize that as some of the limitations that came out of the study. And for me, as I said earlier, that I'm really encouraged and pleasantly surprised somewhat by how much, even small as we are in a big country, but government particularly is starting to engage with us in a meaningful way, which is impacting policy. It's impacting how government thinks about teacher professional development. It's impacting how even universities, because we work with the Department of Higher Education and Training now, and we're starting to have conversations around initial teacher preparation and how that should look like from what universities in South Africa do. It's as I say, it's a complex process. It's the most complex thing I've ever done, but it's also the most fulfilling thing I've ever done, because you start to see the impact, especially in the lives of young people that are coming. We track our young people who leave our school, especially after matric, where they end up, what they do, and we keep, the alumni database to track almost on a longitudinal basis the impact of PBL itself and our approaches to learning and teaching. Yes, what we've done, in our teachers, even those that may have resisted working collaboratively, it's now a norm. It's part of our culture. That's how we do things. And teachers really enjoy it because they learn a lot from one another. They learn about what their colleagues are doing, and they work together, for the common good. So they are just, very major things all right. As I indicated, the research was conducted in only one school. So even though we're starting to work with government, I think it's important to just acknowledge that, the research itself has certain limitations. Yeah, it's quite important. So, but, for me, it's a continuing learning process. Just dealing with the complexity, dealing with, what teachers grapple with every day, and looking at the system, and especially I'm talking about the bigger system, the public system, and how, we may work with government to think about, teacher development, initial teacher education, and so on. So that, but as I say, it is still continuing. And the fact that we have, for instance, the international conference is again putting us on a map in terms of we sharing our experiences and our learnings with others. We're learning from others, with people from China, from India, from the United States, from Denmark, and all this community that's learning from one another, understanding that each education system has a local context. So that's been quite a useful experience for us. Oh, yeah, so that is really, me, and yeah, I'm ready to take questions.
Thank you so much, Sizwe. This is a wonderful presentation. And it's amazing. I mean, the scale of the work that you're doing, it's really I haven't seen anything like this before, so I'm so impressed by it. And I love the way that your presentation ranges from the impact that you see in, one pupil that you're monitoring at that level, and then also to this large scale systemic change making that you're doing. And I'd like to ask that as the first question. So what is the impact that you see when you see the young people that you have followed through the school? Like what would you mention or highlight as some of the impact that you see? And I would like to say to everybody that is here, please unmute yourself and also, become a part of the conversation. I think that we are a number where we can actually have a relatively organic conversation together. So just join in, right?
Yeah.
But Sizwe, thank you. And yeah, so can you tell us what is the impact that you see in the young people?
So, I mean, we collect data from alumni, one about where they are. So obviously the majority end up at university, more than 65% end up at university. And we collect data from them about the transition from school to university. And a lot of them, by far a big majority, indicate that their transition to university is normally much smoother compared to their peers. In other words, because they're used to self-directed learning, self-management, doing research, finding information, analyzing information, creating things. And solving problems, real authentic problems that, when they get to university, it's normally a much, much easier transition than the rest of the other students. Secondly, because one of the fundamental things as part of PBL that we have across is entrepreneurship. The balance, which is about, call it between 20 and 25%, end up following the entrepreneurial route, actually. And especially in the technology space, because we are quite a tech, heavy school. I mean, we teach coding languages, and our students get micro credentials when they are still at school. They may, have Python or Java or C# and things like that, those languages with industry credentials or even micro credentials. Some of them just follow that path. They don't go to university. And they're working for Microsoft or Google or some of the smaller IT companies and that kind of thing. So that's quite an interesting thing. But by far the biggest outcome and impact is just how they adapt to life after school, which has been beyond our own expectations.
Okay, thank you. Mette, you marked?
Yes, thank you for a very interesting presentation. There's a lot to think about here, and I think we have some shared interests in the role of co-creating professional development through a design-based approach. What's new to me here is the systems thinking approach to professional development, and I wrote your references down. I think what we usually work with here is some version of the PCK models, the original one by Jess Newsom, and then the consensus PCK model by Carlson and Dahler. Are you PCK, professional content knowledge? Are you familiar with that model? And do you think, because from your presentation, I think that they're quite similar. That's the embedded values and beliefs within this multifaceted many-layered context of teaching. Yeah.
And before you
I've read about
before you answer, I'd like to say, Mette, can you say just a little bit about where you are from, your background, so that
Oh
Sizwe.
yeah, sorry if I missed an introduction round.
No, I didn't ask that before, but I'm just thinking that it might be nice actually, because not everybody knows each other. So
yes, of course, yeah.
Great.
I'm from Via University College, work with the teacher education, and I teach biology teaching, especially. And I'm interested in systems thinking as well. That's why it's new for me to see the systems thinking approach to professional development, but I'm thinking it must be quite aligned with the PCK approach.
Yes, I mean, I've read about the PCK approach. Obviously, I didn't delve a lot in it, but I fully agree. I think there are similarities in it. Did you say you're at Via University College?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, because I was at Via actually in May this year.
Yeah, I'm at the
brought
campus
some
in
of.
Silkeborg, so I think I missed your visit.
Oh no, I was at Aus in Aus.
Yeah.
So I spent some time. I took some of our teachers there to go and see, how things are done at Via. So interesting.
Yeah.
And we're sort of comparing notes because it's part of our learning to learn how other institutions, especially university colleges in Denmark, how they operate. So yes, we did. I did look at it, and obviously, there's always this challenge of trying to focus, but absolutely, I mean, using the system thinking approach to what to do, and obviously you have an overlay of DBR as well as the complexity theory in it, and for me, has really allowed me to reflect. And I say it's still a work in progress in terms of how we've redesigned our PD on the ground. It's not, we're not there yet. We've done a lot of work following my research and following the DBR process, but it continues to be an iteration. I don't think it will ever be completely there, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a continuing journey. And especially now that we're starting our teacher college for initial teacher preparation, we're thinking quite a lot about how is this going to work, because we live again in a country which has certain minimum prescribed teacher requirement and qualifications, and in a prescribed kind of way that universities and everybody works in South Africa. Sometimes introducing flexibility brings with it, certain complexities, even from how you get accreditation. Sometimes you are forced into the straitjacket, but we know that's not what necessarily works, So yeah. I believe the environment in Denmark is a bit more flexible in terms of what university colleges can or can't do. But in South Africa, it's quite rigid.
Yeah.
And we have to find innovative ways within that.
I need to look up the systems thinking approach, but what you're saying now sounds quite a lot like the layers of the PCK model as well, actually. But that's probably, yes. It's interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
If anybody else has an angle into the relationship between systems thinking and PCK, please do step forward. I can say that one thing that I would mention in that connection or in the relation is, and disagree with me, I may be wrong, but that PCK is something that is oriented towards the content, you can say, so curriculum oriented. What is the body of knowledge that you want teachers to work with, to address in their teaching? And the systems thinking is as much about the system in itself, so the education as a whole system that you're working with. So I would say that they kind of address different levels or different aspects of professional development and also of teacher training. That's kind of my angle, but let's see if anybody has another something else to share on that as well.
Can I come? Yeah, I can't. Most of the time, I can't find the raise hand button, and now I can't again. I found it before, but sorry. But anyway, well, content knowledge is one element of PCK, but beliefs and values are another, and then the school environment and the professional community around the teacher are other layers. So it is really, I haven't thought of it as a systems thinking model, but it really is, because you do have these feedback loops and interacting layers. And I wouldn't say it's content oriented as much as, I mean, it's professional knowledge defined by content being filtered through the system and the criteria you're being evaluated by, and the school culture, and also personal attitudes and beliefs. So I think they're really all in there. So without knowing the Chaban model, I would expect I would expect some overlap, but I need to look it up, so of course.
Great. Good. Wasim?
Okay, thanks really for the presentation. It was really interesting for me. Frankly, I come from software engineering domain, and I am interested in re-engineering formative assessment systems, those technical systems in migration context. And I do this for in my free time. And I have some questions for you, because really it was in the beginning, this term project-based learning has also a component of assessment. And can you tell me more about those form of assessment and how the teachers see those form of assessments? And are there any beliefs that are universal, not only in South Africa settings can man learn, if in my settings also they have those beliefs? That was my questions.
Yeah.
And,
Sorry, are you done?
yes, that was my question.
Okay.
I don't know if the question was
Yeah.
clear, but I am interested in those assessments form in project-based learning, and how the teachers receive those forms, and
Yeah.
what belief can be not in South Africa, but also in universal and global, that I can learn in my settings. In my settings is in Germany,
Yeah.
and the migration context in Germany is a little bit very complex to understand. So.
Yeah. So before I answer, I'll just give a little bit of context about how assessments work generally in South Africa, because the system is still quite traditional. And since we became a democratic country in 1994, 31 years ago, the government, the new government, sort of introduced assessments that were mainly based on knowledge and very little on skills and competencies. And that, for instance, I mean, yeah, if you look at how students typically, or how schools prepare, the system is just based on past exam papers. You drill children about, how to practice, as opposed to testing for their knowledge and application in high order thinking skills in what they do. So that's one of the reasons therefore that, and our students still have to write national exams at grade 12 in a system that's still mainly testing for knowledge as opposed to testing for creating, for skills and competencies, for ability to solve problems and analyze and so on. So what we do then in terms of assessment from the early grades, and another contextual factor is that the system in South Africa is based on school-based assessments up to grade 11, and then suddenly in grade 12, that's the only time that there's an external exam. That's a national examination, right? So you therefore have inconsistencies in the system until you get to the end of the pipeline, which is often a problem. So that's why normally
there's no feedback then.
Yeah, schools teach to they teach to the curriculum. They teach to what is expected in terms of the assessment, formative and summative.
Okay.
There is little focus on high order thinking skills and creating things and that kind of thing. So what we've done in our own schools as part of constructive alignment is to align how we plan, how we teach in the classroom, and how we assess in a very deliberate way to look at those skills and competencies. And again, it's still a work in progress because, I mean, there are different countries that have competency frameworks, as an example, or competency-based assessments, as an example. So we're trying to create our own that are aligned to our context and our curriculum. But what happens typically is from the early grades, like for instance, if children are working on projects or problems, they'll be assessed formatively, and part of that is largely developmental assessment. In other words, to make sure that they are developing those gaps or whatever they are in terms of knowledge or skills or competencies and so on. As they progress to the upper grades, there's and we assess also individuals as well as collectives, because when they're working on projects up to grade 9, they're working in teams, typically teams of 4 or 5. So we will, the teachers will assess them based on what they've done individually. So they get the individual report cards, but they also get collective, cards. Especially bearing in mind that normally how the groups are formed, some of them are directed by teachers, some of them, the students form themselves into groups. We try and make sure that they are more diverse and they are more mixed. So there are formative assessments, there are summative assessments at the end of each term that include the assessment of their projects, whatever projects they were doing. And that assessment includes integrated papers. So let me just give an example. So every term, students across all grades will write a paper that has different components. There's a section that's mathematics, there's a section that's natural science, there's a section that is language, there's a section that is in one paper. Mm-hmm. So, and we're assessing the ability to connect the dots across different subject domains. It's quite a challenging thing for students initially, especially in the lower grades, to have a paper that has a maths in it, that has language in it, that has social science in it, that has natural science in it. But as they go to the more senior grades, you find that the way they engage with those assessments is a lot more integrated and a lot more multidisciplinary. They're able to connect the dots, and they may be presented with a case study that has all the elements, that has all the subjects in a case study, and then they have to, solve a problem, or answer questions or do tasks. Sometimes it is tasks that they have to accomplish, out of that integrated paper or out of that case study. So that's typically how we assess. But as I said, it's also still work in progress, because when they get to grade 12, we then just focus them on passing the national exam. And the national exam is about knowledge. But normally they do quite well. So we produce much better results, especially as, the level of passes in South Africa is still linked to the socioeconomic class. We serve the low to middle income that would never pass at the levels where they pass compared to the national average. We are way above our socioeconomic class, which actually shows that the quality of our learning and teaching and assessments is certainly good. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, frankly, one more question. Do teachers have capacity to look at assessment as inquiry, as research, and understand how they can improve their assessments belief or assessments practice in South Africa or not? Or they use predefined assessment somewhere and they try to implement it without any reflection of this assessment works or not?
In the national system, you'd normally just have you get given, this is how the assessment normally works and so on. In our own environment, we've tried to, we run multiple PDs on the topic of assessment.
Okay.
Formative, summative, competency-based, skill-based assessments and all of this. And we try and get resources from, because we don't really have much in our country. So, we sort of try and create those PDs from content that we pull from all over outside of South Africa. But it's a complex process because we still have to try and sort of retrofit it to our own context.
Yeah, interesting. Many thanks for your answer and for your presentation, and I wish you all success.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wasim. So one of the things that you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation as your motivation for starting the PhD process was a question of how do we know that what we are doing actually works? I mean, that was your entry point you mentioned as starting up your thesis work. And I'm curious about, do you feel that you now know that what you're doing actually works? I mean, has it been possible to create the research base for that, or do you see the question differently now?
So one thing that I've really come to realize is how broad this thing called education is, and how broad and how deep it is. And I've only touched the tip of the iceberg, even if that. So that's why what we are now doing amongst our teachers is to encourage all of our teachers, or at least not all, because not all of them will ever do it, but many of our teachers to do research, which is something that's unknown in South Africa for teachers. At universities, of course, academics, lecturers do research all the time. And we're thinking about that even in the context of our college, because normally, faculties of education in South African universities are teaching. That they do research, but they don't do as much research, if you know what I mean. So just encouraging a culture of research on various diverse topics is something that we now have on our agenda. It's early stages, like for instance, we've set a target. We're finishing 10 years in 2027. And we've set a target for we put an incentive on the table for our teachers to come forward and do research. We have quite a lot of teachers who end up at master's level. They never do PhDs. So yes, we do some research up to master's level, but we're now encouraging some of our teachers to follow PhDs as an example and do research, because the questions that we need to ask around how do we know that what we do works is quite a complex thing and has so many dimensions and angles that have to be explored. And in South Africa, this also, the issue of research and production of knowledge also takes racial dimensions, because we're a very racially divided country. Typically, research comes from formerly white institutions in South Africa and not much from Black people in South Africa. So we have knowledge that comes from one section of the population, if you like, that was well-resourced and so on. And there's a huge issue, at least in my own mind, about research in our context, bearing in mind that 85% of our population is Black. So there's a huge issue. I know this may not make sense to you, but it's a big issue in South Africa, that we consume things and knowledge that either come from the West or that come from a very small 9% of our population produces most of the research.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of questions that have to be asked.
And so what are the kinds of questions or research focuses that you see potentially can come forward from having a less limited point of departure in terms of the research?
Ooh, there are just so many. There are many, they include, for instance, there's a huge issue in South Africa around language of learning and teaching. English is the main language of learning and teaching, taught by 85% of teachers who are not English home language speakers, to 85% of the students who are not English home language speakers. So that's a big topic on its own. There are topics around, PBL itself is new. We are the ones who are driving the introduction of PBL in South Africa. There's so many topics about, just talk about assessments, competency-based assessments, or how do you assess for skills and competencies and knowledge? That's a huge topic on its own, which I didn't even explore. I mean, the question that Wasim was asking is a big topic for research, around assessments. There are topics around pedagogical content knowledge that, Mette raised earlier. There are just so many topics.
So what I'm hearing you saying also when you answer the question of whether how you know that what you're doing is actually working is that you're addressing something that becomes a different kind of culture of inquiry or a culture of research and learning. And in that sense, I think I see also connections between the way that you are working at a systemic level. So you're working with policy, you're working with educational technology, you're working with a teacher education, you're working directly into schools as well. So it is really this massive also kind of change agency in relation to promoting a particular kind of learning and research inquiry. So not as an output necessarily in a kind of limited sense, but as this more coherent, almost systemic or ecological change towards a continuous process of learning. And I can't help but connect it to concepts like lifelong learning and the kind of orientation you also have in private companies about organizational learning and how you continue having this kind of reflective approach to not only understanding or accepting status quo, but also wanting to continuously improve and make better.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that an explicit part of the way that you think of it as well, as a kind of like a culture of learning and research?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
As I say, I mean, we now set a target that, well, by the time we turn 10 years in 2027, we must be producing knowledge as teachers through research, through inquiry, through learning. And we pay for our teachers and encourage them, every staff member. It's not just teachers, because we have people in technology, we have people in marketing, we have people in teacher development and so on. And all of them, we are a learning organization, and we really want to inculcate a culture. I mean, it's the fact that I'm 68 years old. The fact that I, at my age, with everything that I've done in my life, decided to go back to school, it's amazing what that has done in our culture. Suddenly people are like, oh, okay, if you can do it, you know, what a lot of we have a lot of young people in our team. So a lot of them are just inspired. They've started registering, they started learning, they started, you know, yeah.
Yeah. Great. Very inspiring. Wasim?
Frankly, also for me, it's very inspiring. But I have once again one questions. Some critical educators see education as political phenomena, and like Paulo Freire, for example, from Brazil. Others see it as neutrality. How do you see it in South Africa? Is education really political phenomena in South Africa, or it can be also neutral? How you see education in South Africa? Because you have experience and you are 68, and this life, it's also can help us understand how education is seen in South Africa. Is it political, or it's
very, very political.
It's very, very
because we have a very strong history of education as an instrument for suppression, for apartheid in South Africa. And that legacy is not over yet. I mean, I talked about the language issue as just one little example. There are many others. Mathematics, you know, I chair the National Mathematics, you know, program now for the Department of Basic Education, because the apartheid government deliberately for 40 years excluded Black people from learning mathematics. Because the idea was, well, why teach Black people mathematics? What are they going to do with it?
Yes.
And that legacy remains today. And we're trying to change that for inclusion. So this whole concept of mathematics inclusion and exclusion is a real thing. Because I mean, I became an accountant, a chartered accountant, almost by accident. So you want to become a chartered accountant, an engineer, a data scientist, an actuary, whatever it is, any of these science subjects, those things were not available to us as Black people. So it's extremely political. So that's why, just theoretically, I mean, people like Paul Freire is an example. When you think of inclusion and exclusion and what education is and what it should be, you know, it's extremely political because it was part of the architecture of apartheid to exclude, you know, our people.
Yes. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I'm from the teacher education at UC Syd, and I'm really impressed of your work, and I'm reassured that you said that running a big company is easy peasy, no deal, but teacher education and teaching is complex and confusing. So I think my everyday is also confusing and complex. And I have one worry actually that I would like to share with you, because in Denmark many public schools are also very traditional, and teachers' beliefs are traditional. And then they have a few schools that go all in on PBL, or maybe a mixture of PBL and a traditional way of learning. And how can we address that in the teacher education? Or do we end up in a situation with a very limited number of schools that are PBL focused, like the LEAP schools, and we have a majority of schools that are traditional? And then we have a small corner of the teacher education that addresses PBL, but the rest of the teacher education is actually still very traditional. Is that a risk that we can end up in a situation like that?
Yes, I think so, because I mean, we now working with, I'm just at a school level. I mean, working at policy, working with provinces, but we also started working with the actual schools and introducing PBL, particularly in South Africa. There's a new concept of schools that are called schools of specialization. They're more they have a technical and vocational element as well, which has become easier because they get additional resources and so on. It's become easier to introduce PBL there as a start. But even as we introduce it, we were privileged at my schools in that we started with a clean slate. To change from a traditional system to a PBL is complex. It takes time, especially if the system itself, the public system, is still, I mean, just to give, is still very traditional. So in South Africa, our schools get, and which is unlike what you have in Denmark, they get structured annual teaching plans. They are very scripted. They are very traditional. If an inspector, an inspector is inspecting a particular subject, they expect you to be teaching that subject in a particular way on that day. That's how scripted it is. So there's very, very little. I mean, you have a trust system in them that, you know, people sort of, get given a latitude that within that system, you'll do the right thing. In South Africa, it's the other way. So as a result, could we ever have the whole system of 25,000 schools in South Africa, 450,000 teachers adopt PBL? Unlikely, highly unlikely. So I think what you will have are probably these centers of, call it what you may, centers of excellence, centers of specialization, centers of inquiry and research, and the rest of the system will still be quite traditional for a very long time.
Okay, thank you, Sizwe. Lars, do you want to comment on that, or?
Yeah, I agree that that's the way it will develop, and then again, it's difficult in the teacher education because then I will have to educate teachers that can work in both the PBL schools but also in the traditional schools, because you never know where this new in-service teacher will end up when they graduate from our teacher education. Where will they end up? We don't know. So it's actually giving some conflict in my own teaching.
Yeah, that's why, I mean, my own college that I've started is a pure PBL teacher college. So I can focus on those, but I know there are 22 other universities that will be grappling with exactly what you are saying, because they still have to produce teachers for the traditional system and so on. So they may somewhat introduce more inquiry-based, more learner-centered approaches, but for a very long time, they'll still remain traditional.
But Lars, do you not see it as being possible within the Danish frame to actually teach teachers who can teach PBL and also go into a more conventional school?
Yeah, for sure. And of course, I also address engineering approaches and inquiry and PBL and so on. But some of the public schools are very different. If you are going to teach in one of those 10 LEAPS schools we have now, it really takes an effort to become a teacher there. And I don't really think that the way we teach at the teacher education do them right to go into that kind of schools.
Mm-hmm. Can you contextualize what the LEAPS schools are?
They are full-scale PBL schools. It's learning through authentic problems in science. I think that's the acronym. So they model after the high-tech high approach from the US.
Okay, thank you, Wasim. You had a comment as
well? Only I need a comment. I think the teachers will end up be politicians that bring money to research and to make school really real life and not an institution to be used by wrong politicians. That's my hope, but I think it's a very, very difficult task for teachers. We have the same problem in engineering domain also. Many of engineers, they have no consciousness that they are in wrong place, and maybe they wait until the end to decide to come and to fight for better school system. But it's a global issue, to tell you the truth. It's not easy because of big company. They have big tools, big money, big research, and they design the future for their needs. That's maybe global citizenship as term can be discussed in school. How can be teachers prepare next generation for globalization, global citizenship, or something like this? That's my comment.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to allow Sizwe to give a final remark, and then I think we can round off this very, very inspiring and interesting session. So Sizwe, do you have a last comment you would like to provide?
No, I mean, if for me, as you asked the question, Cody, so it's a continuing journey of learning, of inquiry, of trying to work with a bigger ecosystem, the public system particularly, which is complex, is really complex. As I said, in South Africa with 25,000 schools and 13 million children in K-12. In fact, that number is now increasing because early childhood education was sitting outside education. It's now being integrated. So there are another 3 million. So it's about 16 million, almost 17 million, children. So it is a complex system, but, we are encouraged by, government sort of exploring what we do, being interested in what we do, asking for partnerships with us, which also for us exposes us to even more bigger areas of complexity, of inquiry, of research, and so on. So yeah, that's why I think, working in partnership with us, that's why we have, universities that we are partnering with. Okay. This international conference on PBL starting next week is actually with 8 faculties of engineering, Wasim, in South Africa, that are adopting or have adopted PBL as an approach in engineering faculties. The education faculties, I guess, to the point that was made by Ibet earlier, it's a bit more complex for them to change from traditional approaches. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the journey continues. But thank you so much for inviting me to this session.
No, it was wonderful to hear it, and I wish you very, all the best with the delegation coming. It's very exciting to hear that there is a whole, what was it, Aalborg municipality that was the whole delegation that you were working now? Yeah, and also all the best with the conference. I hope that we will see more of your work also in Denmark, and maybe even we can form a delegation and come visit your schools at some point. That might be exciting.
Yeah, I'm bringing another group of about 15 teachers around March, April next year. So I will get in touch with you. I may be going to VIA again in ours, but I'd like to expose them to other situations. So, Connie, I'll get in touch with you and see how
you're very welcome. That would be
we can work together.
Yeah, great, good. Thank you. Have a nice evening and a nice time at the conference. Thank you all for participating. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.